Welcome to the show. Tonight we're going to be joined by Ian from Philadelphia. Hey Ian, how's it going?
Going well, Earl. How you doing tonight?
Doing great, dude.
Good. Glad to be here. Looking forward to talking a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, we're glad to have you here. And so Ian and I, we've known each other for definitely over 20 years. So when I first moved to Philadelphia, there was this house that had punk rock shows in the basement. And this was around 2002. It was called the Murder House. So we actually played there. I got to know everybody. That's how I know Ian. And I ended up having my own experiences at this house because I would go over and just hang out sometime. I'll throw those in towards the end of the show. But for now, I am just going to let Ian take it away. And if you would tell everybody about some of your own experiences or other people's, or yeah, really whatever you want, I'll let you, the stage is yours.
Okay. My name's Ian, as Earl said, and I'm from Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia, and I've been here for 44 years, so I'm not one of these guys who's from the other side of the river from New Jersey. I'm not from Conshohocken. I'm not from Wilkes-Barre. I'm from Philadelphia proper, 19144. And I was born into a house, and I still live here, so I'm sort of like an inner city, maybe, inner city hick, we'll say. I've lived in the same 1 mile radius my whole entire life. When I was born into this house in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. And the Germantown section of Philadelphia, it's a Victorian neighborhood, and it's a historical designated neighborhood. And my house was built in the year of 1852 was when my house was constructed. So, it's coming up on its 1852 to 1952 to 2052. We're going to be looking at 200 years. And the house was built on a old German farm called the Wick Farm. And the Wick Farm started at Germantown Avenue. It expands all the way to what's called the Wissahickon, or as I like to say, Valley Green. And this was the first house that was built on the Wick land. And so I was born in 1981, and we lived in the house. In the 1950s, this home was converted into apartments. So it was a single family home, large home. And then in the 1950s, they converted it into a 7-unit apartment. And my family and I, we lived in the back apartment, and there were 6 other apartments, that were being rented with various tenants. Well, over time, my father befriended the landlord, and he eventually was able to purchase the home from the landlord. And the house went through varying stages of us living in the home and returning it back to a single family home. And then at other times we moved around the corner into another house, and he turned it back into an apartment building where there would be 7 apartments rented at one time. Well, I guess it was about 7th or 8th grade. It was one of those periods where the home was actually functioning as a business or an apartment building. And my father would rent the apartments to there was a college, a couple miles away. It was called, it was called Textile University. It's now owned by Jefferson. But so he would rent it to college students from Jefferson Hospital and also Textile. And there was a crowd of people here. One of the people, her name was Therese. I won't say her last name. And she was a medical student, and she lived in the home. And I remember her telling my father stories, or my father telling me stories, where this woman, Therese, her telephone would fly across the room, and she would encounter, the things happening in the home that were, abnormal. Like I said, the phone flying across the room, lights turning on and off, things that, scared her. And we're talking somebody who went to medical school, once again, supposedly of high intelligence, good test scores, a person who has her wits about her. Let's say a year or so later, the house sort of turned into a Melrose type of place, if anybody remembers that show, where it was a community of college kids who all befriended each other. There was one tenant, her name was Stefan. And Stefan at one point she made a boyfriend whose name was Larry Stromberg. And Larry and Stromberg, they started dating. They got married eventually. And I remember Larry Stromberg because he came to our other house, which was around the corner, and he helped us move a radiator. And occasionally he would come over and he would help my father maybe move some things. And Larry Stromberg was a strong guy. He was a weightlifter. He was a bodybuilder. He was a muscle man. The other thing that's important to know about Larry Stromberg is he actually was a film student at Temple University, and his genre of choice for his film degree was actually horror. And one of his school projects, he shot a college essay horror film in the basement of the apartment building of the house. Well, let's fast forward and over some time. Larry and Stefan's relationship became strained. From what I understand, is that Stefan, she did cheat on Larry with, I believe, her husband, and they became estranged. And Stefan, Larry moved out of the apartment, and Stefan was going to leave Philadelphia, and she was going to move back to Florida. Stefan's mother came up from Florida to help her move, help her pack up the apartment on a summer day. And the apartment that Stefan and Larry lived in was the back apartment, and it has its own entrance, unlike the rest of the apartments in the building. So it's a ground floor apartment, and it has its own door that basically leads into the backyard. And you can imagine Stefan and her mother on a hot summer day in Philadelphia were packing up her things to move out. Larry Stromberg came into the apartment in a late morning, early afternoon with a hunting knife, and he dispatched his estranged wife and his estranged wife, mother-in-law. You know, it was a very violent crime, and it was a very sensational crime. A Temple University film student, murdered his estranged wife and mother-in-law, and it was actually picked up by a tawdry tabloid show of the 80s and 90s that was called Hard Copy. And so this, incident at the home was, aired on Hard Copy, and it was in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I still actually have clippings from the microfiche at the Philadelphia Public Library that my friend got out. So this very grisly incident happened in the home, and a lot of the tenants were here. We're talking late afternoon or late morning, early afternoon, a bunch of college kids. Needless to say, everybody moved out of the apartment building. Nobody wanted to stay here or to continue to rent because they were close friends. We have a swimming pool on the property, so people would hang out. Everybody left. Shortly thereafter, the building being a public or being a apartment building was no longer tenable, and my father had to sort of close down that aspect, that business, and we moved out of our single family home that was around the corner, and we moved back into the apartment building. We took down some of the partitions, and then we continued to live in here as a family home once again. After that point, I started playing in a band, in rock bands. My first band was a punk band, and I was sort of in a progressive band. And we actually had a hard time coming up with a band name. And I will say this, that the person who named my band Murder House is actually the interviewee or the interviewer of this evening. It's Earl. So I have to thank Earl for that. But then my house commonly became known as the Murder House. And a lot of people said that, a lot of people had incidences where things happened or they saw things. We were all in our late teens or early 20s. I had one good friend, Pat, who, said he saw some sort of apparition or a gremlin in the parking lot or maybe in the hallway. And it spoke to him in his mind and told him its name. Pat received the name Grimalkin in his mind. He didn't orally hear a voice. I believe the name Grimalkin appeared in his mind. And myself, throughout the years, I've had a few occurrences of what I would never say are anything major. I remember one time a bathtub turned on when I was in the bathroom. And I've got to say, the plumbing in the house is very old. There could have been water pressure. There are mechanical reasons why I imagine something like this can happen. And I had an old Panasonic television. This was, before the flat screens, an old television transistor. And that used to come, turn on, turn off by itself. And, lights have gone off and on, in the home over the years. And I still live in this murder house to this day. And even with all of this said, with, the murders happening in the 90s, I really don't believe in ghosts. I feel no benevolent force in the home. I feel no malevolent force in the home. I just don't think that anything is here. And because I don't feel that anything is here, I don't really have a life experience that would say that I believe in ghosts. If I were to experience something, that I could definitely say this is a ghost. I believe I'm the type of person who would confess and say, then ghosts do in fact exist. The other thing that I have thought about over the years is when tenants lived here, they expressed sightings and things happening that they found disturbing. Like I said, things moving across the room, things that, could be considered almost violent or forceful by a spirit. And one thing that I've always thought is that activity may have subsided over the years because whatever may be here or the house may be at peace because there aren't transient people or there isn't, tenants and people coming and going, and it's more of a family home. And we don't do much to fix the house, so there isn't that much of a disturbance. There hasn't been many changes made to the home, and we just sort of live in the house the way it is. But one thing that I do think about often, as I said, the murders that happened in the back rear apartment. And this is, first floor apartment, ground floor. We have had pretty much every tenant who has lived in that apartment since that time has left on very bad terms. And I guess I should say this. The house right now is a single family home, and we have rented out different apartments while living here. The back apartment where the murders happened has remained a rental for pretty much the duration. We had one couple that lived back there, and I actually played music with the gentleman, and he came to this house in this apartment, and he was a very nice guy, bright-eyed, talented guy. He had a job. I think him and his girlfriend made it about 1 year in that apartment. By the end of their tenure in the apartment, he had devolved into a raging alcoholic, and actually confronted neighbors saying very disturbing things. He spat at my father and called my father a racial slur, a derogatory term for a Jewish person. Ultimately, this couple was asked to leave the apartment. We also had a single man who then rented the apartment after that. My wife and I were very close with this person. Before he moved in, we spent a lot of time with him, and he was a recovered sober person, so he was an alcohol in the past, and he was totally sober when he moved into the apartment. And we had a great relationship. And once again, he was here for, I think, maybe 3 years. By the end of his tenure, he was a raging alcoholic, and we had to ask him to leave as well. It got so bad that he was parking vehicles in the front of the house, and howling at the moon and just causing disturbance after disturbance after disturbance. And, who came to this property as our friend was asked to leave, and we don't communicate with this person any longer. Um, we had a female who lived in this apartment, and she was a friend, and she was a close friend as well. And she was a smart girl, came from a smart family from a wealthy section of Philadelphia. I won't say where. But by the time she left this apartment, um, she wound up dating, a drug abuser, and we every night my wife and I would hear them fighting, physically screaming at each other, throwing things. And then after the next day, after they would patch it up, this tenant would confess to my wife and I, because we were still friendly, and they were doing really wild stuff, urinating on each other, just stuff that when she came here, I wouldn't be able to imagine this type of behavior happening. And ultimately, and the boyfriend at the time, he tried to get into a physical altercation with me at one point in time. Of course, that didn't happen. I'm not that type of person. So ultimately, this is another instance of people who came to this house and this property as friends, and by the time they had left, did not resemble the person they were when they came. I'm not saying this is the house's fault or any spirits that lived here, but these are things that have happened that I think may have some tie-in. But I am not a believer in ghosts. I'd like to think that I believe in the afterlife, and but that's pretty much it. That's my story, the tale of the murder house.
So I'm going to add in, I have a few questions, all right,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
before that I throw in my experiences at the house.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first one I want to ask is about the phone. So the people who said the phone that got thrown across the room, so literally they claim that the phone lifted up and literally flew across the room like somebody, an invisible person picked it up and threw it. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're talking about before there were cell phones. This is a landline in the 90s where it was sitting on a table and it physically flung across the room. But this is the story I was told. Yes.
Right. And another thing is the Grimalkin. I had totally forgot about that until so it's been like, almost it's got to be like 15 years till since I probably even thought about that or had that in like that memory had just vanished because I've been doing so much other crazy stuff. But I remember that. I totally remember that. And I may have even heard it from the person who actually claimed that they saw Grimalkin or heard the telepathic message or whatever. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think I just heard it from you. I think I might have heard it from the person who actually said it.
Right, and you spent time with them, and you were here at that time. I don't think that I would have a problem. Would it be an issue if I said a first name?
No, first name's fine.
Yeah, it was Pat, and he was friends with Josh, and he was around a lot.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah. And I hadn't thought about Grimalkin for a very long time until this interview came up. But you can corroborate that this was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
thing that happened here.
As soon as you said that, I just started smiling. I was like, "Holy! I can't believe that totally forgot about that." Now, I was going to tell you like about the water turning on. So
Hmm.
I've had experience like when I was working in New York at the Plaza Hotel. There was this place called the Oak Room, and the Oak Room was lower level Plaza Hotel, and everybody said it was haunted. So I'd worked several jobs in there. In this particular job, it was in the morning, and we were breaking down from a live event that they had the night before. It was sunshine coming in. It's a very famous room if anybody wants to look it up, called the Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel. So I'm there, coiling up cables, pulling up, tearing down equipment, breaking it down. And then all of a sudden, there's a big sink behind the bar, and it was completely shut off. I mean, off. And it just goes from being off to completely full stream. And I
Hmm.
went, so I've done some plumbing work before. So I went over and messed with the handles, and there was no reason why that should have just turned on full blast. That was weird. And so there was the guy that was with me, he would work at the Plaza Hotel full time as AV. And I asked him, I said, "Did you just see that?" He's like, "Oh, yeah." He said, "A lot of weird things happen down here."
Hmm.
So that was crazy. The water turning
So
on.
So the water that turned on here, it's a clawfoot tub. And if you can imagine this, the stems, that bring the hot and the cold water come through the floor and you see the piping. And the stems end up in a handle that's, built into the piping. We're not talking about a handle that's in the wall. It's everything is exposed, and it's an old 1800s tub and piping system, and to actually turn the tub, you know does take a considerable amount of force. This is copper piping. This is not something that you could like bump or nudge. You actually have to give this a solid turn to make this function, to actually cut off and on the water. But there could be some buildup of pressure or air or something. It's possible, I imagine. If I was
It is
to,
possible, definitely. It definitely is possible. And I wanted to
yeah,
add, so the that apartment, that bottom back apartment. So I've been in that apartment a few times because back during the shows, usually there would be somebody living there that would it was a big party, and they would that room, that apartment was open for people that wanted to come in, and keep beers in the fridge or whatever. But
absolutely.
but I do remember there was a spiral staircase in that apartment, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right? Do I remember that correctly?
You're absolutely right. So it's a two-story apartment. It's split level, and I
Right.
know I
Yeah.
referred to it as the entrance is on the ground floor. So
Exactly. Yeah.
the living room, the kitchen, the dining room is on the ground floor, and then you go up a spiral staircase, and it leads right into a bathroom in the middle of the hallway, and then there is a
Yep.
bedroom
Yep.
on either on the left-hand side and the bedroom on the right-hand side. So you're absolutely right. There is a spiral staircase.
Yeah, I do. See, that's the one thing I remembered about that apartment is the spiral staircase, and it did have a little bit of a creepy vibe. I didn't experience anything in that apartment, but here's the thing: it was always it was always so crazy. Whenever I was around that area, there's always a show going on. Like you wouldn't have known if anything. You're better off being more concerned about what the living people are doing at that point.
I know the stress of that, throwing the punk rock show at the house. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
right. Making sure
and,
they don't tear down your whole foundation of your
yeah,
house.
and even if you remember the person who was renting, and I'm sure you do, Earl. And I didn't bring it up really, but we didn't end on good terms either. So that's actually another instance of somebody who rented the apartment where
All right.
ultimately when they moved out, it was not necessarily a cordial farewell.
Understood. Now here's so okay. So I'm going to share with everyone the experiences I had there. So so okay, I'll start with the first one. It's actually me and you. So I'm over. We're just hanging out. I would come over. We'd talk about music, talk about guitar, whatever. That was usually I'd stop by and would just mostly talk about music because that's what both of us have always done since we were young. So we were just hanging out, and the TV. We're sitting in. I think it was one of your room. I don't know if it was your main room, but it was a room. I think had a cat. Was it whatever your little TV room that was upstairs? And what you talked about earlier, the TV just came on, and this is an old TV. This is not like a remote control TV. This is
Hmm.
like an old TV where you have to get up and turn the button or the knob to turn it on. If I remember correctly.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And that TV came on, and I looked at you. And I was like, "Does that happen often?" And you're like, "Yeah, it happens every now and then."
Yeah, that's true. It happened, pretty frequently. You experienced it.
Yep. And then I don't know if it was that same day or a different day that you know that was on I think the top floor, and then we heard somebody walking up the stairs. And here's the thing: that's typical because people were always stopping by to hang out. You're a musician. You got lots of musician friends that like to stop by and either play music, talk music, whatever. But we
Hmm.
heard somebody walking up the stairs, And I was like, oh, that must be somebody. So I get up and I go. I was going to let him in case I don't know if the door was locked. I don't even know if that door locked. But anyway, I was like, well, I'll just go see who it is. I opened the door and nobody was there. And then I came back and I was like, you heard that, right? And you're like, yeah, I heard that. So I do remember that specifically. That's one I remember specifically. But that's not the craziest one. The craziest one, and this is the last one. So we have a mutual friend, and we had helped him. I was helping him get a solo band started, and we were practicing. And for some reason, your house was a hangout, so we were over at your house hanging out, and we were in a little side room. I don't even no. You know what it was? It was your band room where you had your drums and everything set up at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were in there because I guess, and we weren't even. If I think I had the amp on, but it was low because we didn't have the microphone like the PA system on, and we were just rehearsing because we were going to be recording, and we were just going over some songs, and there was a song called "Zombie," and so we started playing it, and he was singing the lyric. I think the lyrics were like, "I'm not freshly dead, but I still think and I don't think I'm alive," or something. But as soon as he started singing those lyrics, this cold, cold air just started blowing through the room.
Mm.
Crazy cold air. And there was a string coming down from the light. Those string, it might even still be there, the strings that, you pull to turn the light on and off.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So it was blowing. Like you could see it blowing, whatever this cold wind was. And it was coming from not the windows. And I don't even know if it was cold out, but it was freezing air. And so I just looked at him. He looked at me. We kept playing, and then I stopped. I was like, what was that? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know what that was, but that was creepy. So
Uh-huh.
I checked all the windows. There was no breeze coming in the windows. I checked the door, and there was no breeze coming in the door, and it was, everything was back to normal. But for about 3 or 4 seconds, this crazy, and it was a weird cold too. It wasn't a normal cold. I got to say, that was the weirdest, one of the more weirder ghost things I've ever had. I'm thinking that I'm trying to remember if there's anything else, but I'm pretty sure that's it as far as
So,
that particular experience was. But that was weird. That was totally weird.
funnily, strangely enough, not this is strange at all, but my old band room that you had this experience is now my son's bedroom.
Oh wow. But like you said, but here's the thing. I think what you said makes a lot of sense. It might have all subsided since then. Because here's the thing: those transient people you were talking about, I was probably
Mhm.
one of them back then. I was one of those transient, always coming through, stopping by, seeing what was going on, talking music or whatever. But now I suspect it's probably a lot calmer environment than back then. 23 years ago.
It is a calmer environment, and you know what? I have sadness about that. My father does as well because he still lives here. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of fun things happening. It was really a great time. It is calmer here, and the house is calm, and there is a calmness in the neighborhood. The neighborhood has changed. The people who live in the neighborhood have changed. There's been a lot of change here. The house is by and large the same. The energy here is calmer and it's slower. People used to come here all the time. One girl who wound up in the apartment building across the street was actually she auditioned for the first season of American Idol. And she was actually broadcasted on American Idol. And if you watch the first season, there's a young girl. Her name's Alexis. And she basically does a carbon copy of Janis Joplin, her vocals. And my father took in this girl, Alexis, almost like, he took in a stray cat. I don't mean to sound derogatory, but, and sadly enough, after Alexis was here, she was a troubled person. And she took a liking to me because I was a musician and she was a singer and she wanted to do music with me, but I didn't want to get involved because she was just a little too off center for me. Well, she got hit and killed by a car in Atlantic City not long after my father befriended her and I sort of sent her on her way. And then a few weeks after that, she wound up in Atlantic City. and got struck by a car at night, and then sadly enough passed away just sort of in a gutter, between parked cars and the sidewalk. So, and that was sort of really the end of people coming and going, because I became so tired. Not, I was tired of people being here, but my father wasn't. And she was one of the last people that came around here of sort of that, young, wild, unbridled energy.
Right. And another thing is cell phones, because back in the day, before cell phones, that people would just stop by people's houses like a lot. You never knew who was going to, it doesn't matter who you were, where you at, you would usually, people would stop by. That was just a thing. But
That was just,
it's a lot more rare now that cell phones are a thing. Like usually you give people a heads up before you're going to stop at their house. Usually. I mean, there's still, you still got some old school people that still do it old school, but in general, most people, they'll call or text before they actually stop at your house.
yeah, I like the, I miss a drop in. I do miss a good drop in. I get them occasionally, but there's nothing wrong with a drop in, people. Just keep it before 9:30 p.m.
I hear you. Well, listen, Ian, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories. That was great. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap it up?
No, I guess I'm going to kick the can down the road. I feel content. I feel honored and to have had this conversation with everybody and to have told my story. Feel free to reach out if you have anything that you want to sort of catch up on or cover, maybe after listening to it, or maybe somebody may reach out to you. And one other thing, I could send you those. I have the printouts, as I said, from the Philadelphia Inquirer. If you ever want some of that stuff to look over yourself, or if you ever want to do anything with it, just let me know and I could scan that and send that over to you.
That sounds good. That sounds
Yeah.
great. Well, listen, it's been a lot of fun, and I want to thank everybody for listening. And until next time, everyone.